Well, Joe, you've just done half of my speech for me, but at conferences like this, most of the business gets done around the coffee table, and the networking that's starting to happen is quite fantastic. And don't overlook the importance of having a coffee with someone you've never met. And that's my challenge to you right now, because what I'm about to share with you has its roots in a cup of coffee with someone who was a complete and utter stranger to me 9 years ago. But from that conversation came the seed funding to start the program that you're going to see right now. So my challenge to you, as soon as we finish here, is to go downstairs, grab a coffee, and go up to someone you haven't spoken to all conference and start sharing information, because that's where things start to happen. What I'm going to share with you also is highly replicable. All of you could do this. I've lost count of how many nationalities I've heard mentioned in the last 36 hours. But I think if all of you take a moment to ponder, I think you will all probably find that your community has tensions within, be they ethnic or cultural or political in origin. Connecting Cultures was set up to try and proactively address the issue of community cohesion and to promote intercultural dialogue between cultures that were distinctly polarizing. It's almost mirroring exactly why the Wilderness Leadership School was started back in South Africa. As Joe rightly says, the economic argument and the argument for wilderness, the business case for wilderness, is as strong revolving around people as we heard yesterday revolving around biodiversity. The Institute for Economics and Peace produce every year something called the Global Peace Index. The last 6 years has seen the world become a less peaceful place, and that is primarily due to an increase in internal conflict. And I think you only have to look at the headlines at the moment to see that Syria is right up there in terms of internal conflict. The economic impact of that, separate to what Joe says, 2012, the economic impact of global conflict is estimated to be $9.4 trillion US. I think that could fund 1 or 2 green corridors in the Carpathian Mountains. $9.4 trillion represents double the value of the global agricultural output every year, and 5 times the value of the global tourism industry. Last summer, this is the afternoon of eccentric English people. Last summer, you saw the best of what my country has to offer. The Olympic Games and all their splendor, a great coming together of cultures. But let it not gloss over what was the situation the summer before. And the irony of this, of the worst social unrest that has occurred in my country since I was born 51 years ago. The irony of this was that the British government had just announced the best ever examination results at school. Isn't our education policy great? But actually, this is the result. So there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect in what we're preparing our young people for. And thank goodness for people like Anthony Selden. Anthony is the principal of Wellington College just outside London, a great educational thinker. And he saw the disconnect, and he wrote an article in the Times saying, yes, but what grade did you get for character? And he started to question what education is really all about. Didn't take long for the spin doctors of Downing Street to kick into action. And within a week of those riots in London, where was the British Prime Minister seen? Outward bound in the Lake District in northwest England. Outdoors, because it's here where you can learn lessons that are impossible to learn in a classroom. On a global scale, one of Kofi Annan's last acts before he left the UN was to stand on a bridge over the Bosphorus River in Turkey. And it was a very appropriate place to stand because, as most of you well-traveled people will know, a bridge over the Bosphorus connects cultures. It connects Europe to Asia. And he stood there because he could see this polarization of cultures was becoming a global issue and something needed to be done. And he announced the creation of what is now the youngest of the UN organizations, the UN AOC, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. It was funded, co-funded by Spain and Turkey. President Zapatero and President Erdogan of Turkey, the last time I was here in Spain, we spoke in Madrid in front of 800 people, and Ban Ki-moon, and Connecting Cultures was cited by the UN as one of the world's leading civil society initiatives. We heard Steve Carver yesterday talking about terra incognita, the unknown lands. And the Middle East hasn't really featured in the last couple of days. I've seen, obviously and understandably, a very European focus, a great focus on Africa, USA. This morning we heard about our friends in Australia, Canada. But for most people, the Middle East, the real Middle East, remains terra incognita, because what you see in the headlines is not real, is not the reality of the Middle East. On the continuing theme of eccentric English people, the gentleman that wrote this book, T. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, this is actually the most beautiful book. It's for those of you who've spent time in the desert. If you read this book, it's poetry. He describes the fireplace as the University of the Desert. Remember, this book was written in the First World War. Around that fireplace, news is exchanged, stories are told, and disputes are settled. And when we came up with a logo for Connecting Cultures, that was very much what we wanted to replicate. We had the vision of young people from the Arab world and the Western world sitting together around a fire in the desert, trying to create a better future. But where to start? Where to get the money? I'm sure most of you in this room suffer the same frustrations that I do, and Joe does, I know, trying to get money out of people who have increasingly less money to give. Our first journey was designed specifically to grab the media attention, to take young people out of the frying pan of the desert and to deposit them in the freezer of the Arctic. You might have heard Peter talking last night about what happened in WILD10 in northern Norway. Well, we took a team of young people from Saudi Arabia and UK together to what is probably one of the most pristine and well-managed wilderness areas in Europe, Svalbard, off the north coast of Norway. And we spent 2 weeks there, working as a team to overcome all sorts of challenges and obstacles. It was a wonderful experience. Wasn't the best in hindsight for sitting around a fire and talking, because it was a little bit cold, but it did the job of grabbing the media attention, and that enabled us to shift from the desert of snow and ice to the desert of sand. Huge similarities, I'm sure you will agree. Connecting Cultures now takes place in this little country called Oman, and I was curious over lunch today to hear one of my graduates from the University of the Desert talking about her experiences, and the gentleman she was talking to, when she said Oman, he said, where? The Middle East really is terra incognita for many, many people. Oman is the most beautiful country. It's about the size of Britain, but with only 3 million people. We have wilderness in abundance. The biggest sand desert on earth, the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, spills over into our borders from Saudi Arabia, and we have mountains that go up to 10,000 feet. There have been times when Connecting Cultures has nearly died due to lack of funding, but at the moment we have funding for 5 more years, which is wonderful, from the Omani government, because it's so proud of what's happening on its doorstep. Connecting Cultures is now Oman's gift to UNESCO and the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. And I find it quite ironic that while some of the world's military might has been chasing various fugitives in caves in Afghanistan and Pakistan, we've been living in caves for 9 years in Oman, trying to solve the world's problems through Connecting Cultures. But what happens on a Connecting Cultures course? Well, again, it's very much based on our friends in South Africa and the wonderful work that they do. When I had the idea of setting this up, it was Ian Player that I spoke to. And what you see happening in Umfolozi is happening exactly in the deserts of Oman. Very much journey-based, very much about making plans for a better future and inspiring young leaders to get out there and to make a difference. But we must not forget the gentleman that's leading the camels. I was very pleased this morning to hear a lot of focus on indigenous societies. The FTSE 100 index, which is London's biggest economic powerhouse, the collection of the 100 biggest companies in Britain, set up in 1984 with 100 companies who, at the time, it was impossible to imagine life without. Only 8 of those original 100 companies remain. How can it be that only 8 remain? 92 of those immovable objects have died. They have not survived in their own environment. And yet, this Bedou leading the camels has survived in one of the most hostile environments on earth for thousands of years. There are lessons that we can learn from traditional society, from bush to boardroom. We bring together young people who are really what we consider to be young opinion formers. These young people are an inspiration. I've been a teacher for 21 years, which partly explains the haircut that you see in front of you now. But the 5 days I spend in the desert with these people each winter is the most powerful educational experience I have ever witnessed. We have young people from some of the most volatile countries that you will see in the news, from Iran, from Iraq, from Yemen, from Lebanon, from Jordan, and many of the countries that are present here today and where we've had speakers on the stage, from Finland, from Switzerland, UK, Netherlands, Spain, Germany, Saudi Arabia. We bring all these people together and we head off into the desert for 5 days, no mobile phones, no distractions, journey-based, lots of discussion, quite focused discussion, and discussion that leads to end results. That's really why we are there. It's not a holiday, it's an educational experience that needs an action plan at the end of it. The joy of operating in the desert, unlike the Arctic, is that you can keep talking all night. And the biggest problem we have is getting the young people to go to bed, because next day is going to be even longer and require even more thought and reflection. We call it the University of the Desert. We're going to be talking about it more later on this week, but I'm going to invite up onto the stage now 2 graduates of that university who are going to talk to you a little bit about what they did and what they learned. Hiba and Martin, please come up.
Marhaba, ismi Hiba al-Hejazi. For all of those who don't speak Arabic, I just introduced myself and welcomed you all. As I said, my name is Hiba al-Hejazi and I'm 23 years old. I'm a recent graduate, having completed my Masters in Middle East Politics at SOAS University in London. As evidenced by my introduction, I come from a mixed background. I was born and brought up in the UK, but I'm originally half Saudi, half Jordanian. Coming from a mixed background, I've gained an interesting insight into 2 differing worlds that I believe have many commonalities within them. This is something that Connecting Cultures builds on, and it's what initially sparked my interest in the organization. This is especially true since for me, cultural dialogue is a lived reality. It's something I deal with on a day-to-day basis. The age that we live in, we see a lot of portrayal in the media of a clash between East and West. For me, this has always bewildered me, because growing up, I've always seen these 2 worlds as just being naturally my home. And the idea that there are people within these worlds who view each other as alien disheartens me. Having said that, coming to the expedition, I did have some reservations. Ironically enough, one of them was that, would I get along with everyone? This is an understandable issue, considering the fact that we would be stuck in a desert for a week with not much else to entertain us except for the rolling currents of the desert. And this is where I believe that being in the wilderness really helped us. As a group, going through the same trials and tribulations on this expedition allowed us to create shared experiences, which helped us in forming bonds of solidarity. I don't think you could have easily replicated this environment in a town hall, a meeting, or a lobby. And it's exemplified best by something I experienced while on one of my expeditions. Unfortunately enough, I got injured while I was on my expedition, but nothing too serious. But it was heartwarming for me to see girls who I didn't know a week ago taking time out to not only take care of me, but to ensure that I was never left alone. And it's this constant human interaction which helps us in building bridges and furthering dialogue. There's another thing I believe that shouldn't be underestimated when we talk about the wilderness, and it's the awe we feel when we're in it. Whenever you're in the wilderness, you can't help but be stunned and humbled by the beauty that surrounds you. And what that does is it reminds you that regardless of how long you've lived and how long the human race has been alive, the earth has been here for longer than that. And that too, the earth and to the animal kingdom that surrounds us, we are all the same species, regardless of our different ethnicities, religions, cultures, or creeds. We're all human. And this helps bring me to my final point about what I learned from this expedition. It taught me that you don't have to have a mixed background to create linkages between different cultures, because there were girls from Switzerland who instantly connected with girls from Oman, and girls from Germany who instantly connected with girls from Jordan, even though none of these girls had visited their respective countries. And this brings me to a positive point, which is that in a world that has conflict and complexity, extremism and hate, it's encouraging to see the lengths that we can go to in breaking down stereotypes and misconceptions through the simple act of human interaction. And I also think that it highlights that there is a latent potential in the wilderness that surrounds us for us to build these vital connections between these different cultures. Thank you.
My name is Martin Wauligmann. I'm from Germany, from a city called Münster. Back in 2011, I heard of connecting cultures through my teacher, Christoph Lammen, who was the UNESCO coordinator at my school. There are mainly two reasons why I decided to apply for a journey. First of all, the whole idea of exploring the mountains of Oman in a group of 16 young, motivated men sounded like a big adventure to me. We'd be out in the nature for 5 days, without access to mobile phones or even toilets. Secondly, the topics of our journey promised some great discussions. Our main questions were, what is culture exactly? How can we define it? Is cultural diversity a good or a bad thing? And finally, how is our perception of other cultures formed? I gained one of the strongest insights in one of our very first sessions. The task was fairly simple, but the outcome powerful. We were asked to note down the 4 most important things in our life. And afterwards, we collect them on a flip chart. Now in theory, there could have been 64 different answers, but we just got to about 8 to 10. Among them were family, friends, education, freedom, health, nature, and religion. Now what did we learn from this? Despite the seemingly great cultural differences between Europe and the Arab world, we as young people still share the same fundamental values. Now you might ask, but what about the features that distinguish us? Like our mindset, our language. Aren't those causing a barrier that we first need to overcome? Is cultural diversity a bad thing? I hold the opposite to be true. I think it is exactly this diversity that makes intercultural dialogue so fascinating. Our journey itself is a perfect example of how other cultures can not only work together, but enrich each other. Through connecting cultures, I learned cultural diversity is a reason to celebrate. It's part of a world's beauty. At this point, many people ask me, but why did you have to do this in the wilderness? Why not just sit together in a regular classroom and have discussions? I have to admit, before expedition, I was a bit unsure myself of how the nature would improve our debates. It was only later that I realized that this unconventional setting is what makes connecting cultures a unique learning experience. Instead of discussing issues online or in a conference room, the nature itself would become our learning space during the upcoming journey. It fostered team spirit in a way I had not previously experienced. From day one on, there was something that connected us all. After only 5 days, it felt like we had known each other for a very long time. Especially in the evening at the bonfire, there was a surprisingly strong bond of trust among us. Very many personal stories have been shared. In today's world, it's rare for most people to find themselves at a place of wilderness, where there's no sign of civilization, often no mobile phone coverage. Although, as a computer science student, I'm a big fan of technology, I still believe the most important form of communication is undisturbed face-to-face dialogue. Taking all this together, I think wilderness is a crucial part of the success of connecting cultures. On our last day, we had to say goodbye. Many of my new friends said, "See you again" to me. Somehow I felt that this was more of a promise than a simple phrase or unfulfillable wish. And indeed, only a few months later, I met Mohammed from Iraq and Hassan from Morocco again. This time in my home city in Münster in Germany. How could this happen? My NGO, The Global Experience, hosted an international summer seminar on the topic of journalism. And I had the chance to recommend the two to the organizing manager, a friend of mine, Karina Schmidt. By then I realized our Connecting Cultures journey didn't end in the mountains of Oman. It is our lifelong attempt at understanding the world around us. Thank you.
Whilst we don't take mobile phones into the desert with us, we do use technology to communicate. Because if you're going to accept the corporate shilling, the corporate beast, the corporate tribe expects a return on that investment. We're able, using simple communications, to send what we call trail tweets or trail posts live from the desert. Very simple. BBC picked up on that, and all of a sudden we had quite a lot of interest from the media who wanted to sponsor and support something that they didn't realize was existing. I'll be talking on Tuesday, I think, about how we use social media and technology to communicate from wilderness. But you can see here there's a particularly fantastic bit of software we're using called iPadio, which means that we can post audio blogs from the desert which automatically geolocate onto a Google Earth map, which means people can actually follow our journey from home. So the school that Martin and Hiba left behind can follow their progress through the desert on their Connecting Cultures journey. And we call it the digital campfire, for those of you that can't be there. We have a series of lesson plans that teachers can download and use building up to the journey. So we encourage schools around the world to follow what we're doing and to engage in the debates that we have around that fire, albeit in a classroom. And you'll see down here some people dressed like colourful canaries, which is obviously DHL. DHL were one of our key partners at the start of this when times were pretty tough financially, and they're the perfect partner for Connecting Cultures. This isn't a plug for DHL, but this is just as it was. 280,000 employees. It is probably one of the most truly global organizations there is across all continents and cultures. They funded 2 journeys for us in the 1990s, when we, in the late 2000s, when we were really struggling for money. And they wanted to measure the impact of their investment. We'll have a look at these statistics. $30,000 US investment to sponsor 2 Connecting Cultures journeys. DHL appointed a media relations company in Dubai to measure the impact. And the impact was 29.2 million people. And there are ways that you can measure this. It is quite a science. And look at the estimated advertising value to DHL of all that media coverage that they had. 1.292, so $1,292,000. Not a bad return on an investment of 30,000. I'm sure you'll agree. So that's it. That's what Connecting Cultures is. A little bit of a snapshot of who we are, what we do. It is replicable. You can all do it in your own communities. We're doing 2 workshops on Tuesday. We are still also looking for young people to join us in Oman for our 3 winter journeys. So if you know any outstanding young people like you've heard speaking here, have a look at our website, get in touch, and we'd really like to hear from them. Thank you very much, Duke.